Welcome back everyone to episode 10 of our tutorial series on Distant Worlds Universe. In this episode we've finally gotten hyperdrive technology. There she is, warp field precursors. And I just want to point out that the speed of this one is 2000. The speed of the next one is almost an order of magnitude, almost 10 times faster at 12,500. So the way I separate things in my brain is if I zoom out, pre-warp, obviously, you only have your single system. The very first tier of warp allows you just to travel very locally in the very few systems surrounding your home system, which makes sense. As you get to that second tier in warp drive technology, that usually opens up the entire map to you. So I consider that like the first phase is pre-warp, the second phase is local inter-system travel, and then the third phase is where you're just expanding as fast as possible in every direction. Fourth phase of the game, in my opinion, is when you get landlocked, as in you can't expand any further because empires have now spread out so that they're all pushed out as far as they can against each other. So in this one, we're going to just talk about hyperdrive technology. The very next thing after this to do is resorts and passenger ships, but let's just jump into design. Actually, before I do that, I just want to kind of showcase the distances we're going to have to deal with, because this is important when we're making our calculations for our ship designs. Note that I have this tutorial world is slightly more spread out, because remember, I choose slightly less stars and a slightly larger grid to work with, so everything's a little bit stretched out. If you do it like a normal recommended or like whatever the default settings are, the systems are going to be a little more closely bunched. So it's just not the case in my situation by design. However, in this design, this is the way I play all my games, so this is the way I'm familiar with it, but I need about so this is a sector, obviously, one grid, which means that diagonal travel is longer. So it looks like I need about, this is probably half a sector. This is maybe, this might even be like 0.7 sectors. It looks like in order to get good scouting on this map, I'm going to need about 0.7 sectors. Hopefully one of these two will be a gas cloud which provides Castellon, in which case I'll be able to keep leapfrogging down here. If not, I don't think I'm going to have the range to go from here to here directly. Well, I can, because the range we're going to target is about 1.5 sectors, but that doesn't allow you to make a return voyage. Okay, so the quick note I should make immediately about that is that you can actually travel quite fine without fuel, just at 1/3 your normal speed. So if you want to throw an explorer ship a little bit beyond its good range, that's okay. It just won't come back very quickly. So I usually try to leave enough fuel for them to get there and get back, but especially because if you do exploration when they're running out of fuel, they try to automatically go home to refuel when they get about halfway empty, and then you have to micromanage, so it's kind of a pain. All that being said, let's go ahead and just jump into the ship design, but we already know I'm kind of targeting about 1.5 so that they can go 0.7 and back. We're going to start with state ships. In fact, let's just go ahead and design the Scout, but I have all these ships designs saved. And to speed up the tutorial video, I'm going to just briefly show the constructor and a bunch of the civilian ships. But you'll see the design methodology when we do our upgrade to the Scout, and you can apply that yourself if you want to do something different. Okay, so I'm going to auto upgrade the Scout, which is basically just going to upgrade our small fuel tank to the standard fuel cell one. And other than that, this is the general 1, 2, 3 step for going from pre-warp to getting warp drive. The first thing we're going to do is just add the warp drive itself. Let me sort by category. Okay, and I will talk a little bit about the mechanic for speed with the warp drive, but I guess this is as good of time as any to do that right now. So with ion thrusters, we're used to adding a whole bunch of them, because the more thrusters, the more thrust, and thrust is speed is some function of thrust versus size. So the larger ships obviously need more thrusters to go the same speed. Same thing with directional thrusters. So the engines, they work on this mechanic. That's not at all the way the warp drives work. They have a fixed speed no matter what size ship is employing the warp drive. So size 100, size 1000, it's identical. Both of them will go 2000, assuming that you can supply the full energy needs. So just like in this case we have with our ion thrusters, we need 4 energy use for thrust for maximum for sprint, but we only need 2 for cruise. And we see that we have 37 extra energy. So the 11 times 2 gives us 22, so our 41 speed based on 139 size. But we can only supply 37 of the 44 energy we need for sprint, which means that although technically obviously sprint should be somewhat faster than cruise, it's not because we're energy deficient. The same mechanic applies with hyperdrives. In fact, that's the only limiting factor, because usually you add more engines and your size limited. Like the first exploration ships, we didn't want to keep adding more thrusters because, well, mainly you're adding a lot of maintenance, but we could only go up to, I think, 160 is the first cutoff. So we didn't have a whole lot more space to deal with, and I think this was a plateau for life and hab. Doesn't matter, but for hyperdrive, the main mechanic, the main difficulty is just getting enough energy. Because you can see we're going to need a lot more reactors to get full power out of this. The warp drives require 132 energy, and right now we only are generating 46 per reactor. So gone are the days of our one basic reactor. As soon as we add a warp drive, we're going to always just add 2 basic reactors to get us to a total of 3. This is going from pre-warp to warp. I find that this is a good rule of thumb. So add 2 more basic reactors. If I do that slower, you can see that the 1 is 560, 2 is 1257, 3 is 1954. And that's going to be sufficient because the max speed is 2000. And adding another reactor at size of 18 is going to eat in so much space that we need to increase our range, which you can see is only 0.45 right now. This is the huge limiting factor for your first tier ships with warp drive, is their range. As soon as you get the faster hyperdrive, the 12,500 speed one, which is really expensive to research, so you won't be getting it anytime soon, then you won't have as much of a problem with fuel. Usually at that point, the maximum range of your ship is about the size or even larger than the Galaxy grid. But to start with, this speed of 2001 burns energy still pretty quickly and only goes, not that far, as we can see by the range indicated here, only 0.5 with this setup. So the extra 18 size, I don't feel it's warranted for just an additional 50 speed. Although you don't want to take this to the extreme the other way either, because as you can see, your range drops as you drop down your power, just because the whole ship is slightly less efficient if you're using your warp drive at a suboptimal rate. If you want a rule of thumb, I love these rule of thumbs. My rule of thumb is 90%. If I am going below 90% of the given speed, so for that, this would be 1800 on the hyperdrive that can go 2000, that's when I add another reactor. I mean, there's edge cases, I'm sure that you can just figure it out yourself when it would be better to do what, but that's just my rule of thumb. So 1954, I'm going to be okay with this, and we're going to use the extra 18 size for 3 extra standard fuel cells instead, which you can see is really significant. We basically increased our range by 50% at the cost of just 50 speed out of 2000. So it's much better. Okay, so this is the way things go, is you first do the warp drive, then you add 2 more basic space reactors. There is, with the construction ship, I think you have to have 3 because it's down to like 1700 speed, which is a little too slow. And after that, we're just going to start adding standard fuel cells until we get near the limit of our size. We know, of course, that adding a lot more is also going to cause us to need another hab and life. But I'm going to go ahead and do this until it's like, I don't know, something like this. And we'll add the hab and life. Now we're all good except for we're slightly over. I have the ability to build up to 300, but as I've already mentioned, that was just a bonus tech. Around the time you get hyperdrive, you usually only have size 230 ships. So let's build this based on that. Okay, so we have 13 standard fuel cells and we're able to get a range of 1.43. To be honest, I would prefer even longer than this. I prefer 1.5 for my first tier ship. That means that in order to get more standard fuel cells, we're just going to have to take away some of our ion thrusters. But the one thing I didn't mention, I'm just going to save this real fast and just highlight something real fast. When we had intra-system travel, pre-warp, you would just move long distances at cruise speed, then you turn and move to somewhere else. With the advent of warp drives, you almost never use your cruise speed. Now warp drive, when you target an area, you actually don't land exactly where you plan to go. So if, for example, I right click to move right here, let's say this dot right there, I might end up landing in a circle of this around it. So your warp drive, depending on from where you're launching, it's not perfectly accurate. You just arrive more or less in the location. And I don't know anything about the mechanics involved with that, but I just know that you don't exactly arrive at the point you clicked. So you do use cruise speed a little bit because you have to navigate over to the station or to the mining base or whatever it is. So other military ships obviously are going to need engines because all fighting is done sub-warp, but for your civilian ships and for your scouts, your construction ships, most of the time these are only going to need a high speed for hyperdrive once they have that. And the mechanic here is instead of doing cruise, you just warp over here and maybe a little cruise to get to the exact destination. But if you do a multiple trip or like a multi-staged patrol, for example, you warp over here, then you pivot and you warp over here, you pivot and warp over here, and then you pivot and warp. So the two mechanics, mechanics which are important are warp speed, making sure that's high, and then also just your turning rate. However, ion thrusters themselves and this cruise and sprint speed just have a hugely reduced importance. That's all just saying that we're going to reduce our ion thrusters pretty significantly, except for on military ships. So I'm going to take this down to 7, which has cleared up a good amount of size for us. And now we can add a few more standard fuel cells. And then we can even add, I think, okay, so let's add one more. And let's add 2 more directional thrusters. And that's pretty good. So I think this is a very good ship now. Cruise is still at 15, which is good because remember, if you run out of fuel, you move at 1/3 your rate. And planets move around 4. I think they have a speed of around 4. So if this cruise speed divided by 3 is not 4 or higher, you are in a bit of trouble. You might not be able to catch up to a planet as it orbits, which is, it's a bad thing. So we'll go ahead and save this design. And now I'm just going to load a bunch of the other designs. And I'll open them for you so that you can see them. But we won't actually redesign them from scratch. Okay, so this is hyper size. That's the one. And we'll just start loading all the other ones because it'll take us back to that main page every time. Okay, so we'll load the large. The large one I actually don't need to load because its size is over 230. So I'm not going to load that for now. Basically, there's no way to get a reasonable large civilian ship with warp drive when you are restricted to a size of only 230. So actually, I'm going to load it, take that back, but I'll show you it, but it won't mean anything until you get up to the size 300 ships. And I really do just leave it as is. Let me design the small one from scratch, just so we can see one other example, but I'll load the rest of these. Now if I go over to private ships, we should see what is done. Oh, I loaded this is the wrong one. Okay, these are the ones I wanted to load. I don't suppose you can do multiple at a time. No, okay. So let me load the Mark II. All it was doing was loading the exact designs I already have, so that's kind of useless. Let me get these 4 really quickly. Mark II. Now, when you do it this way, it doesn't automatically obsolete the old versions. I guess I could just do it by date created. Or I could just manually select them, like, okay, this one, obsolete. This one, obsolete. This one, obsolete. Ore miner, obsolete. And then the small freighter I will design myself. So I'll go back and look at these. Let's start with our construction ship. And I believe this one is the one that has 4 space reactors. It does, because you can see if I take away one of these reactors, this goes down to 1730, which is a little bit too low. So for the construction ship, I'm allowing the 4 reactors. So the main things to look for here is I think I had to add a cargo bay. I have 11 engines and 13 fuel cells and 3 directional thrusters, 4 space reactors, and then of course hyperdrive. So you can pause this and take a look at the design if you want to copy it yourself. Otherwise, let's move on. For private ships, let me go ahead and redesign the small one myself. So I'll auto upgrade this, edit, and we're going to do the same thing. So this is quickly how you do it. You add your warp drive, hyperdrive, add your 2 reactors, go down to small fuel cells and start adding a whole bunch of these until you get to about the range that you think you're going to want. Add your having life. Note that we're a little bit over, but that's fine because I know I'm going to decrease the number of thrusters. So I just do this, I get the range first because if you're looking for min-max plateaus with the ion thrusters, it's useless to look for those unless you're at the size that you want. So now I can actually start looking for min-max plateaus. We're probably going to want some more of this, and I see we're probably just going to take away an ion thruster. Is that okay? Can we do this? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so cruise of 15, turn rate of 12 is fine, range 1.4. This is acceptable to me, size of 230. So very good, we'll save this here. So you can see the steps. You just first add your warp drive, then you add your 2 more reactors, then you add a whole bunch of small fuel cells, Happen Life, and then you fine tune by adding and subtracting ion thrusters, directional thrusters, and if you need to, add more small fuel cells or subtract 1 or 2. The fine tuning happens at the very end. So save. Great, now let me just go through the rest of these so that you can see them. Let me sort by obsolete. Alright, so the gas extractor, the main things we're changing is 6 ion thrusters, 8 small fuel cell or standard fuel cell, and 3 directional thrusters, along with the 3 reactors and hyperdrive. Okay. For our large, this is the one that, as I said, is meant for size 300 because there's no way to get this ship to function correctly at size 230. So I just build this. You would just ignore this if you only have size 230 to work with. For ore miner, it's going to be more or less the same as the gas miner. 6 ion thrusters, 9 fuel cell, and 2 directional thruster. This one has slightly larger range, I think, than the gas extractor, but mind you that gas extractor can actually refuel itself wherever it goes because it can extract from a gas planet. If the gas planet has Castellon, it can just automatically refuel itself in this manner. Okay, and then last but not least, the medium freighter. 6 ion thrusters, 10 standard fuel, 4 directional, and the usual 3 and 1 for the rest. Great, so that's going to be everything we cover for the ship designs. In the next episode, we're going to cover the passenger ship and resort, as I said. But the very last thing we're going to do here is quickly zoom out. Let's see how many systems we want to explore. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think there's 9 in close proximity. That means I want 9 exploration ships because exploration is very important. So we're just going to build an exploration ship for every system so that we have one going in every direction. Since I have 3, we'll go to the construction yard and I'll build 6 more. So exploration ship Mark II, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, taking us down to almost no funds available. And the last thing we're going to do is just retrofit the existing ones. So we'll get these guys to retrofit to the Mark II. This guy, we can just do it down here, I think. Retrofit to latest design. We don't have enough money. Okay, well, you can see that we've tried to do everything we can, and we'll retrofit as soon as I have a little bit more money, but that's a problem that anybody could run into, so all we need to do is add a little bit of taxes. We'll probably go up to 20% real fast. Just to quickly grab a little bit of money. And when all that happens, I'll go ahead and add the last couple of exploration ships to the retrofit queue. But that's going to conclude this episode, so thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more in the next video.